Again, that was New Mexico Typical under the direction of Calvin Kobayashi. He founded that group probably 40 years ago, right, Calvin? Okay. I failed to mention one more person who is walking around with a camera, and that's Corey Kobayashi. Corey has been going around the state to all of our events, activities. He's been filming everything, or just about everything, because he's going to do a documentary about New Mexico JCL, the families that are here, their stories, because we've got a lot of history here in New Mexico. So Corey has been gracious enough to help us out with that. And with a last name like Kobayashi, you know his dad is the one that just walked out the door. We have another person here, and I would like her to raise her hand. Melanie Stansbury, who's a state representative from District 28. Thank you for joining us here. We really appreciate it. We need to get these stories out about World War II, how it impacted the families here in New Mexico and around the country. And with representatives such as Melanie, that helps us during legislative sessions or in other things. That's one of the ways that we fought forever to get a monument set up for Santa Fe internment camp. That took years on end to get it passed and erected. Now, we've got a brief program for you all right now, and we're ready to start.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if this is on. Can anybody hear me? Anybody? Awesome. All right. Good afternoon. Sorry about that. Welcome to the opening of Courage and Compassion, our shared story of the Japanese-American World War II experience. My name is Rebecca Prinster. I'm the Assistant Curator of History here at the Albuquerque Museum. And I know we have guests from near and far, and I want to welcome all of you on behalf of the museum. This exhibit that we're celebrating today, it was a collaboration between the museum, the New Mexico Japanese American Citizens League, and the Go for Broke National Education Center in Los Angeles. So members of our local Japanese American community they lent their objects and told their stories for this exhibit. So I really encourage you to go check out the exhibit after this play. There's some great stories in there. So now we're going to start our program. And Esther Churchwell is our MC. I think she's going to come up and sort of welcome you all again. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the day.
If you look at the program, it'll explain a bit about this play, this brief play. It's a very condensed play that you're about to see.
He amber waves of grain, a purple mountain majesties. Yes, it did. Any brotherhood from sea to shining sea. You know, I wish I had somebody to help me sing this. America, I love you, America. You see, my God, He done shed His face on thee. You ought to love Him for it, 'cause He crowned my good. He told me He would. Every brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Thank you, Lord.
Hundred-ear cherries now in full bloom in this new land.
The experience of Japanese Americans in New Mexico is a peculiar history, one that's still being written today. But let's start at the beginning. Immigration.
We left Japan seeking adventure. Unfortunate.
We headed for America.
In America, dollars grow on trees. You just reach up and pick them.
America. In America, the talk is all of gold, the gold rush, and gold mountain, and golden fields of grain.
Days of spacious dreams, I sailed for America, overblown with hope, overblown with hope.
The first generation of Japanese living in the United States is called
Issei.
The early Issei of New Mexico were immigrants from Japan. In 1900, the U.S. Census counted only 8 Japanese in New Mexico. By 1920, the lure of coal mining jobs swelled their ranks to a whopping 250. Woo-wee.
I'm a railroad worker. I'm great. The others complain. It's too hot. It's too cold. It rains too often. It snows too much. They all ran off. I alone remain. I built the tracks America travels on. The railroad worker. Me.
It says here, this Japanese labor force was a bachelor community until the picture bride system. What's that?
The picture bride system brought many Japanese women to America.
Ooh-wee.
An exchange of photographs was arranged by a matchmaker in Japan.
I first came to the United States as a picture bride. My family arranged a match with a young man working in America. He and I exchanged photographs. Then we married.
Thus, married by proxy, the intrepid bride sailed across the Pacific to a new husband and a new life.
I'm Evelyn Saeda Tagami.
I'm Mary Saeda Matsubara.
Our mother was a picture bride.
We were born in Albuquerque.
Let's tell the story.
Let's.
On her first day in America, a bunch of young ladies were on the deck, and they were looking over the railing to see the gentleman below.
That's right. And one of them said, "Oh, I think that one's mine."
Then she looked again and said, "Oh no, he's too ugly."
But our dad was handsome, so Mom was lucky.
Mary's husband, Charlie Matsubara, talks about his father who arrived from Japan on a momentous day.
It was April 1906. Soon after landing, my father was caught up in the San Francisco earthquake. When he saw the American flag, he fell in love so much. All through his life, he couldn't wait for a national holiday to come so he could put up the American flag. And this very day, every time I go to the cemetery on special occasions, I take in the American flag. You know, he wanted to be a citizen, but had to wait 50 years. He came in 1906, and they wouldn't let him be a citizen until 1956.
The Issei men and women who came to America gave birth to a new generation of Americans. The second generation of Japanese in America is called Nisei.
The birth of American offspring to immigrant families marked a new era in the lives of Japanese families.
We were American by birth, education, and inclination. Still, there was no denying our Japanese features, our cultures, and our communities.
I was a creature of two worlds, approaching manhood with an American heart and mind and a Japanese face. I was steeped in American culture, but aware of an alien heritage, living in a society not quite ready for me. At times I ask myself, what am I? Where am I going?
My life was an odd mixture of the Occident and the Orient. I sat down to American breakfasts and Japanese lunches. My palate had a fondness for corned beef and cabbage, along with rice. I was comfortable with a knife and fork and with chopsticks.
At Christmas, I hung my stocking over the fireplace, but on New Year's Day, I ate mochi.
Rice cakes. Yum, yum.
And long noodles for good luck and long life.
I said grace at meal times.
Bless this meal.
And my prayers at bedtime.
Now I lay me down to sleep.
My parents spoke to me in both English and Japanese.
And I answered in whatever was convenient or
Or
a mixture of both.
We worked at our family-run businesses after school, but we still played kick the can and baseball. We still listened to Jack Benny and the Lone Ranger.
Hi-oh, Silver!
And we sang along with the top 10 on the hit parade.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
On December the 8th, the financial resources of the Issei community were frozen, and the FBI seized community leaders, Buddhist priests, Christian ministers, language teachers, and owners of fishing boats the government feared would signal enemy ships off the coast of California. All those thought to be security risks.
During World War II, all Americans of Japanese descent living on the West Coast were removed from their homes and put into prison camps. Executive Order number 9066 deprived them of their rights, although they never had been accused of any crime. 120,000 Japanese Americans.
In February of 1942, construction began on a U.S. Army-run camp in the arid land 3 miles from the town of Lordsburg. It would house about 2,000 Issei men from the West Coast that the FBI had rounded up immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Feelings about the camp were mixed among townspeople, according to Lordsburg Museum curator Molly Pressler. Some held the opinion the Army should have locked them up sooner. Many citizens, however, were tolerant toward the men. Since most of them were middle-aged or elderly, it was hard to see any real threat in them.
When members of the Methodist Church noticed that some of the men didn't have winter clothes, townspeople began to donate clothing for delivery to the camp. Some women brought clothes that belonged to their husbands who were serving overseas.
Another act of kindness came from a prisoner to a little girl named Margie Livingston.
I used to ride with my mother to the camp to pick up my dad after work at the sewage treatment plant. One day, a man gave me a pair of sandals he had made. Mother said,
He's probably missing his granddaughter, honey.
I love those sandals so much. I wore them until they fell apart.
1942 to 1943, the year the men spent in Lordsburg was marred by labor disputes, mismanagement, and the killing of 2 elderly men, which led to a court-martial that upheld the guards' claim that the men were shot attempting to escape.
In 2015, a protest in Lordsburg almost canceled our performance there.
We were performing Lordsburg Diary, an oral history based on a diary kept by an Issei man who had been imprisoned in Lordsburg. It was written in Meiji-era Japanese, and so it had never been translated into English.
Our board member, Ikuko Bige, is from Japan. She and a friend translated the diary. And we JACL players adapted it into a reader's theater.
We applied for a humanities grant and performed all over New Mexico.
9 towns in 11 days. We were rehearsing for Lordsburg when Molly Pressler called, sounding distressed.
She said, there's a protest. Small, she said, but someone who's lived in the town a long time.
We offered to cancel. After all, Molly's got to live in that town.
But a few hours later, she called again from the mayor's office. And the mayor was saying, "We won't stand down. We've got something to learn from these people. If the high school doesn't want them, they can come to City Hall."
But the high school did want us.
It was kind of scary, though. Armed police were assigned to us, and they led us to the gym.
And it was amazing. Grown-ups and kids sitting on the risers all over the gym. School kids with their teachers and all. The turnout was so huge, they couldn't fit in the auditorium.
Yeah, the acoustics in that gym were awful. Honestly, it wasn't one of our best performances.
But afterwards, people lined up at the open mic. The woman who started the protest spoke first. She said we were
well-spoken, well-fed, and well-educated. But your people were responsible for the Baton Death March and the deaths of American boys from New Mexico. And nothing you say can make up for that.
Well, she had a right to express her opinion.
And the mayor had told her to express it courteously.
What was remarkable was that nobody reacted or said anything to contradict her. Everybody acted as if she was invisible. And when she was finished, somebody else simply took the mic and said,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for educating our children.
Thank you for educating us.
I apologize for my town.
My mother told me about seeing the men in the camp. She could see that they were not soldiers. People brought them warm clothing. That was nice.
Some people didn't even speak. They just waited in line to shake our hands.
Come again, please. In 1943, the Issei inmates of Lordsburg were transferred to the Santa Fe internment camp operated by the Department of Justice.
Many of these men were also fathers of American-born sons serving in the armed forces of the United States. Tadami Izutsu had volunteered for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team.
I had completed my basic training in Mississippi. On my furlough, I visited my father in Santa Fe, New Mexico. There were no buses at the train station, so I had to hire a cab.
Hey, where to, buddy?
When the driver pulled up to the gate, he said,
Hey, how come you got somebody in there when you're wearing that uniform?
Anti-Japanese letters were often sent to Governor John Miles, like this one, simply signed Lloyd.
You should oppose, with all the vim and vigor you possess, the entrance of any Jap, born either in Japan or the USA, into the state of New Mexico. Either temporary or permanent, all Japs are skunks. And no matter what, whether a skunk is born under what star or what flag, he is still a skunk. Same stripe, same odor, same characteristics. Planting Jap colonies over this country would be worse than filling our water supply with typhus germs. That was woe.
but also revealed were fair-minded souls like teacher F.A. Brookshire.
During my 12 years of teaching school, including 9 years as superintendent, I have taught racial tolerance and the rights and the duties of American citizens. This is part of the democratic process.
David Mason, John Kinsolving, Rudolfo and Francis Rios, and former Mayor Joe Valdez have vivid childhood memories of the camp. Some, like artist Jerry West, retired history teacher Kermit Hill, and retired government official Herman Grace, were sons of guards at the camp. Lucia Ortiz Trujillo has a childhood memory of the Issei men being transported by train to the camp.
I was playing with a group of kids in my older sister Melinda's neighborhood on Manhattan Avenue near the train station. Some Japanese men were being transported to the internment camp. On more than one occasion, when the train pulled into the station, the Japanese men would throw candy bars to us kids. We would get really excited when we heard the train coming, and we'd run towards it in hopes of getting candy bars. I remember walking around with the same kids all the time, and when we were in the area that is now called Casa Solana, we'd walk near the camp and see all the guards and fences and people inside. If it wasn't for the candy, I might not even remember any of it.
In the prevailing narrative of the time, Santa Fe camp was shrouded in mystery and rumor. It became known as the Jap camp or the Jap trap. Joe Martinez, who grew up on Agua Fria, remembers walking around town with his grandfather when he was knee-high.
We'd walk right in front of that camp, you know, and I'd ask, why are they there? Were they mean?
No, Joey, they're just here for safekeeping.
I didn't understand why safekeeping was in a jail. Jail to me is where they put bad people, you know?
Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that road made all the difference.
June 26, 1944, a little town in Italy. Walter Shibata and I.
Standing on the Fort Worth road, separated from our unit,
Let's take the left fork. It looks more traveled.
but before nightfall, we were German prisoners of war. All these years I wondered, why did Company F suffer so many casualties? Why were we left behind on that dusty road in war-torn Italy? January 28, 1943, Fort Shelby, Mississippi. When I first got to Camp Shelby, I couldn't get accustomed to the Hawaiian boys. They talk in pidgin English. I'd say, huh? What are you saying?
They were a bunch of Buddha heads, those Hawaiians.
You was a katunks. Katunk. Yeah, it's like the sound of a coconut fall out the tree and hit the ground. Katunk. Just like the sound of you mainland boys, hollow heads, hitting the ground after losing a fight with us Buddha heads.
They were always arguing about something. Those Hawaiians and us mainland boys, Buddha heads and katongs.
When it came to battle, you were one person. Everyone was family.
On May 1st and 2nd, we shipped out overseas to North Africa and then Italy. From Naples, we marched to Gravesend. On June 26th, companies E, F, and G met fierce resistance.
My company got pinned down. 88 millimeter guns were shooting at us. They got the motorman. He was the first to get killed in our outfit. The commander gave us the order to withdraw and organize.
The squad leader noticed that one of our men was missing. He sent Shibata and me to go look for him.
We went back down to look for them. We saw a lot of dead bodies all over. We decided, well, we better get back and to look for our squad. So we got back up there and the company was gone. I thought, why didn't they wait for us?
There was a fork in the road. One went to the right, and then one went to the left, and we were saying, well, which way did they go?
That one looks more traveled. Gee, I don't remember the other guy's name or how he disappeared, but later I met up with two guys, other guys, Ben Tanaga and Yoshi Masuoka.
Soon we heard voices. Oh, we've taken the wrong path.
We're surrounded by enemy soldiers. We better lay low.
We were discovered by German soldiers.
One of them German fellas talked pretty good English.
Hey, what are you guys doing here? You're supposed to be on our side.
No, we're Americans.
No, you're not.
Look at our uniforms.
That's when they realized Japanese Americans were fighting in Europe.
Eventually, we were transferred from Italy to Stalag 7A, their main POW camp in Germany.
We learned Walter was missing in action.
We worried he was dead.
When we learned he was a prisoner of war, we sent
Lots of parcels with goodies in them.
cigarette,
Cigarettes and stuff. We never got them.
Walter's a local boy, and me and Gallup are eager for news of his well-being.
He's a local boy.
He's one of us.
Walter Shibata was born in Gibson, a mining town near Gallup, in 1917. His parents were Roy and Emma Shibata.
We had
The first Japanese-American baby in New Mexico.
Walter and Ann Shibata's son Ron became a president of the New Mexico chapter of the JACL.
Years later, in a New Mexico JACL interview, Walter and Ann Shibata's son Randy, who was suffering from cancer, said,
I am a New Mexican first. I am an American second, and a Japanese American third.
Walter Shibata was one of 6 New Mexican and Japanese Americans in the 442nd Combat Team. His brother, Edward Shibata, George Teshima, Tatsuo Hirokawa, and Richard Shinto, all of Gallup, and Henry Togami of Blue Water.
I was fortunate to live in New Mexico, especially in Gallup, where it didn't matter if you were Japanese.
while almost 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast were kept in a variety of camps, Department of Justice camps, Army-run camps, or War Relocation Authority family camps, Japanese Americans in New Mexico were not incarcerated.
New Mexico had joined other states in passing an alien land law and supporting immigration restrictions, but had also earned a reputation for diversity and tolerance.
The way we were treated sometimes depended on where we lived.
Before the war, Gallup had the largest Japanese American population in the state.
Jack Shinto's father came to Gallup in 1921. His son Jack says, "It doesn't look like much now, but it was a great place to grow up."
Soon after, my parents started a Japanese language school. When my father's employers, the Santa Fe Railroad Company, heard about it, they donated supplies, textbooks, and a used dining car. It became known as the train school.
In Albuquerque's South Valley, Mary and Evelyn's picture bride mother had no problem adjusting.
The whole neighborhood was mostly Spanish speaking. They taught Mother to make tortillas.
And she spoke Spanish better than she did English.
Tazue Yonemoto was 15 when her family moved to Albuquerque.
We came here shortly after the war. My father was farming in Arizona, but had to give it up because white farmers were flooding the fields and burning Japanese homes.
Tazue was the only daughter in a family of 4 boys.
There was a large Japanese American community in Arizona, but the prejudice was severe.
We weren't allowed to use the public swimming pool. They only let you in if you went the day before they emptied it.
And just as the Japanese Association in Phoenix decided on building their own swimming pool, the war started.
And in New Mexico, we never felt hardship for being Japanese.
When my children were growing up, our husband Taro asked our 2 girls,
Has anyone bothered you?
and they said no, but our son said,
Yeah, one boy.
What did you do about it?
Nothing.
You didn't do anything?
we both jumped on him.
No, because my friends all beat him up.
And that's how things were in Albuquerque.
Their daughter, Keiku Akutagawa's Lambert, is sensei, 3rd generation Japanese American.
In my mother's generation, the Japanese American community was very cohesive, very vibrant, very excited about retaining their cultural history, and very close to everybody. Growing up with Kenny and all the cousins down on 4th Street, I grew up thinking if you were Japanese, you were related.
We used to drive to Gallup and Blue Water to the Tagamis to get together for picnics. Art Tagami always teased the Gallup girls, and they'd go back home mad at us.
The communities in Gallup and Berlin, when soldiers came, refused to allow families to be picked up. So the Shabakas were not picked up, and the Matsu family was not picked up, and continued to farm throughout the war.
My mother, Mary, was the only Japanese-American woman who went inside Santa Fe camp to visit her father. Aunt Tazwa used to drive her to Santa Fe, but she couldn't go in.
People used to line up in front of the barbed wire fence to see him, but Mary was the only one who could go in.
In the late 1910s, despite countless restrictions, some Japanese families began to farm the underdeveloped lands of Nicaea and Las Cruces, growing cantaloupes, onions, cabbages, and tomatoes. Even through the Great Depression, the Tashiro and Nakayama family farm continued to flourish, continuing well into the 1950s.
The Nisei son of a Las Cruces farm family, Dr. Roy Nakayama turned his experience with crops into a scientific career in plant science. He gained fame for developing New Mexico's beloved Big Jim green chili, thereafter becoming known as Mr. Chili.
Dr. Nakayama's niece, Jane Nakayama Cole, relates an act of kindness extended to her grandfather, John Kaichiro Nakayama, during the war years.
A restriction on Japanese traveling more than 25 miles from their homes prevented him from receiving medical treatment in El Paso, Texas. A young lawyer who was beginning his practice in Las Cruces petitioned the U.S. attorney. As a result, John was not only able to travel to El Paso, but the lawyer succeeded in extending his permit from 1 day to 3 months.
The young lawyer who assisted him was Edwin L. Mecum, who became a 3-time governor of New Mexico in the 1950s.
In 1942, Rikiso Miyagishima, an Issei fisherman from Terminal Island, California, was imprisoned in Lordsburg while his wife Rio and 5 American-born children were incarcerated in Poston, Arizona. After the war, the family repatriated to Japan, but one son, Kazuchi, returned to America.
I wanted to join the Navy. I was a fisherman's son, born on Terminal Island. I love the water.
He was turned down by the Navy because of his Japanese heritage, but accepted into the Army Air Corps, which became the U.S. Air Force.
They couldn't pronounce Miyagashima. Miyagashima. I renamed myself Mike.
At Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, Mike met
Gracia Catalina Porras Gallegos, Alamogordo, New Mexico.
both sides of their families.
Objected!
Your children look funny.
We married in 1952 and raised 4 children.
James and Robert,
Born in Holloman Air Force Base,
Carol,
Altus Air Force Base, Oklahoma,
and Kenneth.
Keesler Air Force Base, Mississippi.
We came to Las Cruces after Mike retired. Our youngest, Kenneth, became mayor.
3 times.
Although the wartime hysteria and hostilities that raged through the West Coast and Arizona were not as extreme in New Mexico, still, the Japanese-American community suffered from the loss of jobs, confiscated property, and innumerable institutional restrictions.
Hostility toward Japanese Americans in New Mexico increased as news of the capture of New Mexican soldiers in the Philippines and the atrocities of the Bataan Death March spread throughout our state.
But in Gallup, officials and residents treated their Japanese American neighbors with particular kindness and concern. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Sheriff Dominic Mickey Mollica declared,
The Japanese Americans of Gallup will be treated like my own Italian American family.
In 1944, Jack Shinto's classmates elected him senior class president of Gallup High.
while his older brother Richard fought in Europe in the 442nd. Yaichi Miyamura came to Gallup in 1923, where his son Hiroshi was born in 1925.
I got my name Hiroshi when my school teacher couldn't pronounce Hiroshi.
In 1942, 17-year-old Hershey Miyamura enlisted in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and received basic training in Mississippi and was deployed then to the European theater.
But his combat trials didn't occur until the Korean War, when he was wounded and captured after a fierce firefight with Chinese troops.
When I was released from the POW camp in North Korea 2 years later, I learned I had received the Medal of Honor.
Mickey Malika, who was now mayor, was one of the first to greet him when he returned to his hometown.
Hershey continues to live in his hometown, which includes a highway overpass, a park, and a high school named in his honor.
Unlike Gallup, the towns of Winslow, Arizona, and Clovis, New Mexico, took it upon themselves to remove their Japanese-American residents. In the first month of the war, Clovis's segregated community of 35 Japanese Americans, 17 of whom were children, were held under house arrest. In January 1942, under threat of vigilante violence, the U.S. Border Patrol hastily removed them in the middle of the night. They were transported to Fort Stanton, 150 miles away. Among the young campers were Lily Kimura, 11, her brother Fred, 8, and Roy Ebihara, age 8.
71 years later, Adrian Chavez was taking a college class in Albuquerque on the history of New Mexico, where he learned about the incident of January 1942. But, ladies and gentlemen, I would like Adrian Chavez and Michael LeBray of Clovis, New Mexico, to continue this story.
I returned to Clovis and talked to Mayor David Lancer and the City Commission.
They located 3 survivors of the town who had been children in 1942, Lily Kimura in Kaiohara and her brother Fred Kimura in Portland, Oregon, and Dr. Roy Ibahara in Oberlin, Ohio. Roy's older brother Henry had written about the incident many years later. Adrian read that letter at the mayor and the city council.
In the twilight of my life, my thoughts often return to my childhood and high school. I think of my dear friends who grew up with me, some already dead, some who moved away, and some still living in Clovis. I recall my teachers who not only gave me a good educational start, but also some solid American values, which have sustained me throughout my adult life. I consider my childhood in Clovis to be the experience of a typical American boy.
Henry goes on to state, in the tumult of war hysteria following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, we Americans of Japanese ancestry became the targets of our country's frustration. The saddest part of the exodus of Japanese families from Clovis was the sudden disruption of the children's education, the sudden separation from their friends, and the refusal of the Lincoln County School Board to grant public education to the children held at Baca Camp. What kind of message was being given to these children who were pledging allegiance to the Stars and the Stripes?
Henry writes, the children in my family maintained their faith in this country and remained steadfast in their loyalty. My 2 brothers served in the U.S. Army. One of them fought in the Korean War. The pain inflicted on us by our fellow Americans was at times unbearable.
Despite the loss of 1 year of public education, these children of the Baca camp made up for their loss after the release from the Utah concentration camp. Henry and his siblings live now in various parts of the United States. They married and have become parents to a new generation of Americans.
But says Henry, Clovis will always be remembered as our home, despite the painful memory of our expulsion in January of 1942.
In 2014, Lily, Fred, and Roy were flown to Clovis, where they were greeted with welcome home signs and rode in the Pioneer Days Parade as honorary Grand Marshals, which will be marked this anniversary is 6 years next weekend when they did this by chance. So please come out to Pioneer Days Parade. At an emotional ceremony in the local church where they attended as children, they received the keys to the city and an apology. Accompanying them were their families of the New Mexico Japanese American Citizens League. Folks, that was the largest Japanese American presence in Clovis since 1942. Welcome home.
For a long time, we've been silent. Now I say, what do you mean be quiet? We will have no more silence. Janice Mirikitani, Poet Laureate, San Francisco.
The community my mother Tazwe knew is the one she's always harping on me to fix. Build a community cultural center. Bring in more young people. Create activities that educate us about culture. Keep everybody close so that we know each other and love each other. Keku Octavawa, Lambert, Albuquerque.
I think stories are important because they say something about what it is that we believe. The way that you find out where we have any shared values is in the stories that we tell each other. So the stories are the building blocks of accomplishing anything in this world together.
Even today, voices and stories still come from unexpected places and people, tying us together through time and space.
Many of us who were adults in World War II were no longer with us. Many of us who were children are moving along in age.
Oh, that was good. So it must be true that a bad rehearsal makes for a good performance. I would like you to meet the cast. So could you introduce each other and say a few words? Down at the other end, the railroad guy.
Activist. I'm J.W. Madison. I'm an electrician, old house expert, and an actor from here in Albuquerque. And for about 55 years, I've been a small part of some really great causes, to which I have recently added this one.
I'm Mary Oishi. I am a proud member of JACL Players and toured around the state with them in prior events. And I'm maybe better known as recently retired development director for KUNM and also volunteer host of the Blues Show every other week. And I'm a poet. My book is in the Albuquerque Museum gift shop.
My name is Rusty Chan. I'm not Japanese American. I am the Vice President of the Albuquerque chapter of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and I'm the Board of Directors for the Asian American Association of New Mexico. JACL players because it's time to correct some of the misconceptions that local people have about Japanese Americans and what they were doing here during the war.
My name is Calvin Kobayashi. I am currently on the board of New Mexico JACL and been a member, an active member of the organization for 40 years now. Came to the Players Theater that Nikki so graciously came here with, and saw it for the first time and was so moved by the power of its message to get across that I had to join it.
I'm Bo Allen, a member of the JCL board, and this is such an important community for me. My parents met during occupation. We came back to the segregated South, so my life journey has been around social justice and the issues of finding voice in so many realms, and so just very glad to be here.
I'm Joan Ariki Varney, and I moved here to New Mexico about 6 years ago. And when I met Nikki at one of the Day of Remembrance things, I immediately signed up to join the JCL Players. And yeah, it's been a wonderful journey and a wonderful way to bring this history alive. And we're hoping that if we get this grant we applied for, we can take her around to other states like Colorado and Arizona. So I'm looking forward to getting on the road too.
I'm Eric Shimamoto, Hapa, Yonsei, and this is my second performance with this group. I got involved because Nikki asked me to, I guess. And I think these stories are really important. I think that knowing this history is important because it's profoundly and frighteningly relevant today.
My name is Michael Gray. I'm focused on execution bird, agent, probably involved in this, and he interested me when hearing about 35 people living on railroad property.
back to this country, he married my mother in Colorado. He's going to school there. And, you know, they're both gone now, but I always wanted to ask him, like, what was it that possessed him to marry a Japanese American after that, you know, experience as a prisoner of war? I don't know. What? Oh, I have I think he does.
I'm going to have to project because I took my mic away. Mike, bring my mic back.
He doesn't need a mic.
I am Vicki Nojima Lewis, and Pearl Harbor Day is my 4th birthday. The FBI interrupted my birthday party and took away my dad, and he ended up in Lordsburg and Santa Fe. So this is very much a full circle story for me. I'm very honored to be here. I am the artistic director of JCL Players. I'm a member of the JCL board. I am also the community curator for this wonderful exhibit that this wonderful museum has put on. It lasts for 5 months. Some of the JCL Players will be docents because the regular docents are away for the summer, and hey, we know more about this stuff than they do. And when they come back, we'll be training them. In February, on Day of Remembrance, we did an annual play at the Special Collections Library, and as Joan said, we are waiting for the National Park Service grant, as many of you, with organizations are waiting for, which is delayed because of the government shutdown. But we hope we'll be able to see you as an audience, both in New Mexico and elsewhere. So for now, we will bid you a fond adieu, but it is also my pleasure to introduce somebody who is here from Los Angeles, Mr. George Henning, who arrived late last night.
When Mr. Henning comes up, we actually have a pause with you, our cast, so we have to make a little presentation.
I don't have anything for you, Mr. Henning. I'm sorry. I'm empty-handed. I was up very late finishing this play last night, so I didn't have time to go to shopping.
Nikki, just real quickly, and thank you for your patience, Mr. Henning. Just a moment aside. From the JACL Players, we have a small token of our great love and esteem because you take these stories so tenderly and transform them so that we have the essence and the spirit to share with this lovely audience in front of us. You do this over and over again. You don't sleep at night in order to finish scripts in the great way that amazing writers do. And so we just would like you to have this as a part of something which is from Nuevo Mexico.
Thank you very much. Your presence means a great deal to me. Your interest means a great deal to us, and we hope your continued interest and presence. So hope to see you again next time. And let me welcome Mr. Henning. I heard that he arrived late last night. I hope you had a great flight. Welcome to New Mexico. Have you been here before?
This is my first trip.
Oh, all right. Well, have a good time.
I was heard about back in Mexico, and I was talking to somebody on Wednesday, and they said, "You're going to Albuquerque. How come you've never been there before?" And I said, "Well, I've always wanted to, but haven't had the opportunity." So it's a real pleasure to be here today. As chairman of the board of directors, and also representing the board of governors, it's my privilege to be able to welcome you to the exhibit, Courage and Compassion. It tells very important stories about the Japanese Americans during World War II. And I think as all people here today know, it's still a very relevant story today. We've had the privilege of taking you around the country to about 10 different cities. And one of the real opportunities in each city is to be able to tell the local story. And I know that Mitch, in relating some of these stories to the board, it's been very interesting, but very compelling in terms of local stories, as well as the bigger story about the 442nd during World War II and the Japanese Americans who were interned. We're happy to be here in Mexico. New Mexico has some great stories. I had an opportunity before this program to have a chance to look at it and meet some of the people whose family is from New Mexico. And we're very honored today to have Hershey Yamura with us today. On behalf of Go for Growth, we're so happy you would join us. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mitch Mackey, who is the President and CEO of Go for Growth.
Is this on? No. Turn on? Can you hear me now? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, come on, folks. It's a beautiful day in Albuquerque. You've heard a wonderful play. You're about to see a wonderful exhibit. Good afternoon, everyone. To begin my remarks, I wanted to thank Andrew Connors and the Albuquerque Museum for hosting the exhibit, Courage and Compassion. I would also like to thank Nikki Nojima Lewis and the New Mexico JACL, and in particular the JACL players, for hosting the exhibit, for working on the exhibit, and for putting on this wonderful opening exhibition here today. So thank you all for that. As I came in here this morning and I started looking around and seeing the faces of people who were coming here today, I couldn't help but think of my grandmother, and I'd like to start my comments with a short story about her. You see, if there's any word that would describe the life of my grandmother, that word would have to be hard. She came to Hawaii as a young girl, worked on the plantations, got married at a young age, and by the time she was 30, had 6 children. My grandmother never lived much above the poverty line. So whatever hopes and dreams she had for a better tomorrow rested squarely on the shoulders of her children and of her grandchildren. Now, my grandmother didn't speak much English, and I don't speak much Japanese. In fact, my favorite memory of her is of her chasing me around, yelling, "Bakatare, bakatare." For those of you who don't know that word, it means you stupid idiot, you stupid idiot. I used to hear that so often as a child, I thought it was a term of endearment. I thought she was saying, "My dear grandson, my dear grandson." But just because my grandmother couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Japanese didn't mean that we couldn't communicate. Because we had my mother, who would translate. And the message was always the same. Be good. Take care of family. Remember who you are. Remember who you are. And that's why we have gathered here today, to remember who we are as Japanese Americans, to remember who we are as New Mexicans, but most important, to remember who we are as Americans who treasure the principles of our Constitution and who value America's promise, the promise that in this nation, no one is to be judged by the color of their skin, the nation of their origin, or the God whom they choose to worship. If we believe in America's promise, we must commit ourselves to keeping that promise alive. Go ahead and applaud for that. The exhibit that you're about to see tells stories of New Mexicans in a time of crisis who
did the right thing. You heard many of the stories here today. You'll hear the story of a son of an immigrant, a son of Gallup, Hiroshi Hershey Miyamura, who not only fought in World War II, but also served in the Korean War and was a recipient of the Medal of Honor. You've heard me mention him several times today. You've heard others mention him. But Mr. Miyamura, you need to stand up and take a round of applause. Please stand. You've heard the stories of the Lordsburg camp and how the local community came out and made sure that the men were properly clothed. You heard the story of a son of Clovis, Adrian Chavez, who 70 years later realized that a tragedy, an egregious violation of our Constitution had occurred and that he was to do something about it. These are the stories that you will read and many more in this exhibition. But I want you to also keep another story in mind, and that's the story of the 33,000 Japanese American young men who chose to fight for the United States of America, even though they were treated as second-class citizens in Hawaii, even though their constitutional rights and the constitutional rights of their families were taken away. They chose to serve the United States of America. And in Europe, they would become the most highly decorated unit of their size in American military history. 21 Medals of Honor, 7 Presidential Unit citations, nearly 9,500 Purple Hearts. In the Pacific Theater, they would interview prisoners of war, and they would translate intercepted messages, and they were credited with helping to end the war 2 years earlier than otherwise would have happened, saving countless lives on both sides of the Pacific. Why? Why did they choose to put themselves in harm's way? Why did they choose to serve a nation that had treated them so poorly and taken away the rights that they had and that their families had? The best answer comes from a young sergeant by the name of Kazuo Masuda, who served at the 442nd. When asked why he was doing this, his answer was the answer that many of the Nisei soldiers would have given, which was, because this is the only way that I know that my family can have a chance in America. Right or wrong, agree with him or not, Sergeant Masuda and the other Nisei soldiers understood that in 1943, 1944, and 1945, loyalty needed to be demonstrated in blood. And that's what they did. Now fast forward with me 40 years later. It's the late 1980s, and a bill has been introduced in the U.S. Congress, a bill that would give Japanese and Americans and those affected by Executive Order 9066 a presidential apology and monetary redress payments. September 17, 1987, this bill hits the floor of the House of Representatives, and it passes. 243 representatives vote in favor of this bill. 180 Democrats, 63 Republicans, truly a bipartisan effort. It moves on to the Senate, April 10, 1988, and the Senate passes this bill with 69 United States senators voting in favor of this bill. We now need only one more supporter, one more signature to make this bill law. And of course, that would be the President of the United States. For those of you who remember 1988, you'll remember that the president was none other than Ronald Reagan, a very conservative president whose own administration had been fighting against this bill, both in the courts as well as in the Congress. Many of us in the Japanese American community thought there was no way on God's green earth that Ronald Reagan was going to sign this bill. But the true believers in the movement said we have to press on. For those of you who remember Ronald Reagan, whether you agreed with his policies or not, most people would agree that Ronald Reagan was a great communicator. He had the ability to tell stories that would touch people's hearts and move them in a certain direction. Well, the opposite was true. If you could tell Ronald Reagan a story that would touch his heart, you could have a great advocate on your hands. So the question was, what story could we tell Ronald Reagan that would help him to understand the importance of this bill? Well, remember Kazuo Masuda, the sergeant who said he was fighting to make America a better place for his family? 2 weeks after making that statement, Sergeant Masuda was killed in battle, fighting for his nation, the United States of America. After the war, his family leaves their concentration camp and attempts to move back to Santa Ana, California. And they're met with nothing but hatred, racism, and threats of bodily harm. The U.S. Army realizes that this is a PR fiasco, that one of its own fallen heroes, his own family, can't move back to their home. They send out a contingent of Army officers to have a medal ceremony for the Masuda family. And among those officers was a young white American captain named Ronald Reagan. And Captain Reagan addressed the audience that night by saying, "The blood that is soaked into the sands is all of one color. America stands unique in the world, the only country not founded on race, but on an ideal. Mr. and Mrs. Masuda, as one member of the American family to another, for what your son Kazuo did, thanks." That story was relayed to President Reagan in the late 80s, and his response was, "I remember that family, and I remember what those soldiers did for America." On August 10, 1988, President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, granting a presidential apology and monetary reparations to those affected by Executive Order 9066. It was a great day, not just for Japanese Americans, but for all Americans who value the Constitution and value justice. Now, lest we leave here today believing that justice has been permanently secured, let me leave you with the words of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who said, "The Korematsu decision and what happened to Japanese Americans was wrong. But you are kidding yourself if you think it will never happen again. In times of war, the laws fall silent. In times of war, the laws fall silent." Very chilling words for all of us who value justice and value the principles of our nation. So as we gather here today to remember who we are, to reflect back on the courage and compassion that New Mexicans showed during World War II, and to think about the achievements that we will have in the future, let us recommit ourselves that never again in our nation shall we let our laws fall silent. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the exhibit.